Hey everyone, Eric Rennie here, and welcome to the 59th episode of the Writ Podcast. We're only days away from the Conservative leadership race coming to a close, so I'm joined again today by Chad Rogers of Crestview Strategy, Tim Powers of Summa Strategies, and Stephanie Levitz of the Toronto Star. Hello everyone, we're finally here at the end of this race.
Are we?
Hello.
We've got a few more days to go, and they got to count votes. You never know what can happen.
Well, that brings me to my first question, because, it has been pretty quiet for the last few weeks, because I think all of the campaigns, all they're focused on right now is get out the vote. There's not really much of an air war anymore. It's all about just getting people to actually cast their ballots. I'm curious, Stephanie, because I know you've been looking at this, you wrote about this recently, about people rushing in to cast a ballot. You had one story of someone driving all the way from Bracebridge to Ottawa to get their ballot in. Do you have a sense that this is going well and it's going to go off without a hitch on Saturday?
I think there's some concern inside the party. I mean, I don't know, garden variety concern. I wouldn't think that it's fatal or anything. They are behind in processing the ballots. They're calling in all hands. Turnout is higher than they expected. And, do I think we're going to see a repeat of 2020 with the malfunctioning machine that couldn't rip open the too thick envelopes and delay it? I'm not sure. I don't think they've made some changes even to the shape of the paper to avoid that particular complication. But the turnout is higher than expected, which means that could lead to a delay. But I think the winner will still be crowned the winner on Saturday night.
I think you wrote about it that right now the turnout is somewhere around 64% already, which is matching what it was in the last race. Now, the deadline for getting the ballots in has already passed, so it's probably not going to go up much more than that. But I think when you saw a big number like 670-some thousand people, there was almost an expectation that a lot of them weren't going to end up voting. It was sort of like with the Liberals in 2013. They had a lot of free members, but their turnout wasn't particularly high because there was a lot less commitment. But here, they've got a lot of ballots they're processing, Stephanie.
Yeah, I mean, it's still more ballots than, the last two leadership races combined, right? This is still a high volume. The percentage is what it is, but it's still a lot of people who've made the choice to cast a ballot. And as I saw yesterday, I mean, it wasn't just, this one woman was remarkable. I mean, in her dedication and her pursuit and her determination to cast this ballot. But she wasn't the only one there. I mean, there were campaigns. I watched them like literally running in with stacks of ballots in hands. I think it was about 12 big blue bins worth of ballots coming out of Deloitte, like right after 5 o'clock. So that's, a couple hundred, couple thousand last minute votes that people were running in. So that's engaging, right? That means people are highly engaged in this and want to be a part of it. No matter who their candidate is, they were motivated enough to show up. That's pretty remarkable.
Chad, what do you think how this is going in the final stretch in terms of just the logistics of getting this done?
Pretty good. Look, let's remember, largest leadership or inclusive democratic political process other than an election that's ever occurred in Canada. So kudos for hitting a new high watermark. We often talk about apathy or lack of participation in political process in Canada, the opposite of which is true. There's lots of healthy energy here. I think anecdotally, in talking to the campaigns, their major enemy has been first-time voters not realizing how these processes work because they're a little tricky. And, we think of leaderships being the domain of established partisans who've done this 100 times, where leaderships are actually the onboarding point for people who are doing it for the first time, and leaderships are where they choose to get involved and get swept up. And I think a lot of folks, are getting a phone call saying, have you voted yet? And they're like, yeah, I voted that day I came to the rally and signed up. And they're like, no, that was just signing up. Well, I voted that day that I mailed the form away to get my ballot. No, that's not voting. You haven't finished yet. There's 2 more steps. So I think that of the folks who haven't participated, part of the challenge is the barriers are pretty high. You have to be pretty organized and go through 3 or 4 hoops to actually cast a ballot in the process. And with all of that being true, still getting 400,000 Canadians. I'm from PEI, a province of less than 150,000 people, multiples of my home province participating. Well, I'm pretty impressed.
It's 3 times the number of the base membership going in, if you look at it that way too, right? So that's 3 times, like you assume the base membership is going to cast a vote. Those are the folks Chad's talking about that can do this in their sleep. They've done it so many times with the Conservatives in particular now, but that's 3 times as many people the candidates individually have managed to draw out. And that's pretty impressive.
Tim, I've even gotten questions that, in terms of how you could rank people, whether you could rank someone third as your first. So there is going to be that complication. Have you heard things either from the campaigns or from the party in terms of just the process?
No, not really. I've just seen a lot of the coverage about we're bringing ballots in, we're bringing ballots in. I mean, that's the momentum argument or showcasing that's happening now. Look, being the dimmest of the four here, let me simplify the math for people. So you've all said 60% of 675. What's that? It's 405,000 votes cast. So that, as Chad alluded to, in and of itself is impressive. It's hard not to imagine there will be some complications, though, to be fair to the party. Even the best team trying to get 405,000 votes through. So you should expect some delays and challenges around that. What I found really fascinating, linking to the 405 and linking to your question earlier about things being quiet, was an op-ed piece that was written this past week by Laura Kermacki, who everybody here will know. Laura, well-respected conservative, very close with Jenny Byrne, though has her own opinions. I'm not saying it was Jenny's opinion that Laura was offering. Laura was making the argument in her opinion piece in the Hill Times that, Pierre Poilievre would welcome or would be blessed with an overwhelming majority. And if he got that overwhelming majority, that would help him to ensure more stable transition. And I think that's part of what's at play here. I think the Poilievre campaign, having been the best organized all the way through, it's hard to argue that they weren't, are trying to do that. So there's probably more work going in on their side to make sure they get a comprehensive majority. And I think Chad said this in one of our early podcasts. They're also very attuned to the lessons of past leadership races. That being the front runner, to use a phrase that I hope doesn't offend too many, shits the bed and doesn't win. Pierre doesn't want to defecate on his new conservative leadership Stornoway sheets before he gets the chance to get in there.
All right.
There were probably half a dozen Pierre Poilievre campaign staffers standing in the lobby of that building yesterday running in ballots. Like they were a presence and a force. They were all wearing T-shirts. It was an interesting thing to watch. And also what I noted is you would have thought they would go in and then, run up, deliver the ballots, and then, I don't know, celebrate or perhaps evince some enthusiasm. And it wasn't. They were all back on their phones and then running off down the street to some other thing they had to do. Like, these guys are working right to the end here.
For Jean Charest, one of the hopes would have been that there would have been low turnout among Poilievre's supporters just because his win might have been seen as inevitable. But with these kinds of numbers, Tim, it doesn't seem like that's happening, right?
He's going to lead the Irish leprechaun on my head here, I think, to pull off a victory. And look, I think as we know, I've been the most boisterous around Mr. Charest. I'm a fan, and I know Chad is as well. But yeah, I think short of a miracle, which I don't see transpiring, he's going to probably be concerned about placing, where his placing ends up on Saturday. I mean, it was interesting. Somebody I know in the Charest campaign reached out to me before this podcast and was asking, do you think Pierre is going to win on the first ballot? I haven't answered that question yet because I wanted to hear what Chad was going to say. Not that my thought is driven by Chad's, but I think that's a great possibility. But, Charest hasn't lost yet, and maybe the leprechaun does help him, but it's going to be tough.
All right, let's not get predictions yet. Save it for the end. Okay, I want to go through each of the candidates a little bit, how this race has been helpful or hurtful for their own political futures, because obviously I think we all agree that an upset seems unlikely, and it would be a hell of an upset if it is pulled off. So it is more about how they are, I think, going to place and what it means for their future. So we'll start with Scott Aitchison. Chad, did he succeed in what he set out to do? Because I don't think he set out to win this.
No, he set out to try and be a viable member of a future cabinet as an otherwise white male guy in the Ontario caucus, in a sea of white male guys in the Ontario caucus. Remains to be seen. I'm hearing lots of anecdotal evidence that there are lots of ballots coming in that are Aitchison 1, Pierre 2, and vice versa, that the voting base of Aitchison didn't look like the Charest voting base, voting in protest to a Poilievre leadership. I think that would be helpful for him. For Aitchison now, the big test of whether or not he succeeded will be, does he get a Tier 1 critics post in the new caucus? And does he prove himself in the first 6 to 8 months of the opposition leadership of Poilievre in distinguishing himself and showing that he can do the critic's job and gain some attention and build some credibility. But as of today, I mean, we know his name and we're talking about him, and that's completely changed the conditions he lived in a year ago.
Tim, is that it? Is that enough for him?
Maybe. I mean, look, I think he's positioned himself as well as a thoughtful, moderate, but a team player. And that could be a very useful position if Conservatives do find themselves, again, a year and a half back in, or 3 years, whenever the election comes and they don't succeed, in a position of defeat. So I think he's done very well. I mean, for me, again, Eric, it will be interesting to see, you know, what second, third, and fourth look like in terms of support. And that, I think, you know, if Poilievre wins, he'll also be looking at that as well. His team certainly will be. But I think Scott Aitchison has done himself well. He's certainly not done himself harm. He's not done himself harm.
Stephanie, do you agree with that?
I mean, I would say, you know, first, do no harm maybe should be the principle of leadership races, right? Try and find a way to keep the tent together. Don't poke your opponents in the eye in a way that's going to be fatal at the end of the day. Scott Aitchison has definitely done that. I do, you know, some of the folks I talk to, a little bit of ruffled feathers over his tone sometimes, his chastising, like, you know, you're all crazy, like the interaction he had with Leslyn Lewis during one of the debates where he effectively called her a conspiracy theorist. There will be, you know, remaining factions within caucus after this leadership race. Scott, going into it, wasn't part of any one of them in particular. He wasn't part of a gang. He didn't have a little coterie around him. So that's interesting. Is he a caucus lone wolf? And I don't mean that in a negative way. Can he play the bridge for Poilievre between some of these other factions? Some of the moderates, for example, who did support Charest, if Poilievre were to, let's say, reward Aitchison, does that make them feel better? Right? Is he a proxy for that group in caucus? I think that's an interesting play for him. I mean, and he remains ambitious, Aitchison. Like, I'm not sure that, you know, was this a cabinet play? Does he see himself as a prime minister one day? I don't know. He says, you know, he's going to keep taking French lessons. He's going to keep hustling. So maybe there's more we haven't heard from him yet.
Remember the state motto of Missouri? The show me
we
state.
We all remember that, Jeff.
The show me
right.
state.
Yes.
So when you say I'm from Missouri, I think Scott Aitchison is a classic example of an I'm from Missouri case. He's entirely got to make his brand about being competent. He's got to do the same thing David Emerson had to prove to conservatives that he was going to be as good a conservative as he was a liberal because of his competency as a minister. Aitchison's got to step up and prove that he's competent, not that he's a moderate. You can't prove you're a moderate. That's like saying you're a passionate advocate for the color beige. He's got to stand up and say he's just really, really good at the subject matter assigned and getting the work done and good with stakeholders, and that's all work that has yet to be done.
I want to move on to Roman Baber. You know, Scott Aitchison has a caucus seat. He'll go back to being an MP. Baber does not. He was an independent. He was originally elected as an Ontario PC. He was booted out of caucus. That is an independent. Now has no job after this. Tim, do you think that he has carved a place for himself? Is he going to be welcome as a quote-unquote star candidate for Pierre Poilievre in 2025?
Minister of Foreign Affairs, it's done. Is he going to be a candidate is probably my question. I don't mean to be hard on the guy. Like, what was his game plan in the beginning? And I'm not sure I've ever known that. So is he running to be a candidate? Maybe he's done okay if that's his perspective. But I don't know what he's added to the whole dialogue. Other than he spent a couple of $100,000 of his own money or the money of others to get into this. So Baber is, for me, he's still a question mark.
Stephanie, he still raised a decent amount of money, had about as many contributors as Charest did. So he does seem to have some support. I am curious to see what he's going to get on that first ballot.
Yeah, I mean, I you know, if people are playing the horse race game, right, I mean, it's, you know, Aitchison will have the lowest amount of support, and then above him will be Roman Baber. That seems to be the current consensus view of things. I mean, it's an interesting thing, you know, when people ask Jean Charest, would you run for the Conservatives under a Pierre Poilievre-led government, and Charest was, you know, wouldn't say, and it was a big deal, Roman won't say either. Roman has not said, you know, convincingly that he is committed to be a Conservative member of Parliament if the next leader will have him for, which is generally the standard answer you give, right? If you're a conservative, you want to be a conservative member of parliament. It should be both things. So, he brings with him a base of national support that he built in his immediate ouster from Doug Ford's caucus. And in as much as, Pierre Poilievre is discussed as the candidate who met the moment in terms of his policy, in terms of his drive, his thematics, Baber also met the moment. Poilievre's taking it forward. Baber is still stuck in time. Although he's put out a lot of policy ideas. He's talked, a lot of sacred cows. He wants to slay supply management. He's got ideas. But what he hasn't shown, I think, to the party perhaps is what would he like to do with those ideas if he's not going to be leader? Scott Aitchison the other day put out, a couple of fundraising pitches that all but conceded defeat, right? Acknowledged he was not going to win, acknowledged he does not have a chance, and I'm going to be a team player. Roman, like Tim said, what do you want to do next, Roman? Where is your vision for you, the country, your ideas? Does that play into a conservative government? I think people would like to know the answers to those questions.
Chad, do you think this is the last we hear of him, or do you think we'll see him around?
No, I think Roman Baber probably gets offered one of the 2 York seats competitively, which should be strong potential pickups in a Poilievre campaign, particularly the seat of former member Michael Levitz, who's now the CEO of the Wiesenthal Center. I think that'll be a very hard hold for the government. Roman will be quite viable there. Roman has reinvented himself ideologically a few times in his short career, but he's clearly a decent communicator who knows how to build a base. I think he'll be given a shot. For me, the prediction of whether or not he will seriously transition into federal politics will be his views on the Russian invasion of Ukraine and Roman's Russian support, and whether or not he calls the balls and strikes clean on Ukraine. That would be the only thing I would see as the tiger trap in front of him. Otherwise, I think he's going to be a decently high-profile candidate in one of the York seats in GTA.
If the next election is in 2025, this race will feel like ancient history. So there's also that. Maybe by then, he won't be someone that the party is really all that bothered about trying to get involved.
But one of the areas where O'Toole was particularly incompetent as leader is he didn't seem to ever remember you have to keep a count of winning enough seats to form a government. And if Roman Baber is enough to add one more seat in GTA because he's the nominee and he can raise the money and do it, the way you win is by getting enough seats to form a majority. And if it's one more seat, that's worth conceding, building a space in the team. And that's where the role, of campaign manager is so different than leader. The leader's got to have a campaign manager sitting in a room with them, screaming at them, saying, I know you don't totally love this. It isn't the perfect solution, but it's potentially one more seat or 2 more seats. Peter MacKay should have been running in the last federal election as part of the Aaron O'Toole team. He wasn't because Aaron O'Toole, the leader, didn't want it to happen. And in turn, he gave up between 1 and 3 seats as a result. You have to remember to count. If Roman Baber is 1 or 2 seats as a pickup, well, the leader's got to seriously consider it.
That brings to mind another license plate that we must talk about it, Eric. Je me souviens. I mean, we've had Missouri, now Quebec. I will remember. I mean, if we're going to make this about license plates today, let's get them out there.
Okay, let's move on to Leslyn Lewis. For me, the question here is not so much whether she's helped herself in terms of her own political future. I'm wondering about whether her campaign, in the end, will have helped the social conservative movement within the party. Because you could argue in 2020, she was a little bit of a star. She came out of nowhere. People weren't all that aware of her. She did really well. In the leadership race, she finished first in just the terms of number of votes on the second round of voting. And she was a kingmaker. She was the one who had her votes went over to O'Toole, or enough of them did, to make him win. This time, if Poilievre wins on the first ballot, he will have won without the explicit support of a social conservative candidate, social conservative organizations. Tim, do you think that out of this, Leslyn Lewis will, and the movement that she represented, is going to be stronger or weaker?
Well, I remember fairy tales, and I never heard Cinderella became Cinderella twice. You can only put the glass slipper on once. And I think she probably was, she's limited by the expectations of the first race. It's hard to be a darling, to continue the metaphor, a second time. Now, that said, people were surprised by her ballot. If she finishes ahead of Charest, I think she has demonstrated that she's still a power player. Now, how does she use that power? To your question, Eric, is it for social conservative causes and being the standard bearer, or does she look to expand it? If she has long-term political ambition, I think she can do both, maintain her core and go forward. And there's nothing to suggest, and I'm not using ambition as a dirty word here, that she doesn't. I think she's demonstrated she's committed to being an influential conservative voice. Is the voice as influential as it was? TBC on Saturday night.
Chad?
Well, again, I'll go back to the greatest hits of the mistakes of Aaron O'Toole, right? Leslyn Lewis should have had a senior role in the previous caucus. And I assume Pierre Poilievre looks at her and says, a black female lawyer with doctor in front of her name in a safe seat in Ontario is a pretty powerful resource that any leader should be using in their caucus, particularly when they're communicating, the best of talent and diversity and the like are part of the Conservative coalition, not always assumed to be. Let's remember the Social Conservative coalition also isn't homogeneous in any way. It's a heterogeneous issue set. And I think with Patrick Brown's removal from the race, the altitude and the energy around the Leslyn Lewis campaign was there's a competitive race here, and we have to make a point and then win, but make a point first. With Patrick Brown's removal from the race and a belief on the part of many conservatives from all parts of the spectrum in the party that the race had now pivoted to no longer being an internecine war and now being about preparing Poilievre to fight Justin Trudeau, I think the energy really fell out of the Lewis campaign. The premium to do that values vote as part of the competitive leadership race, the motivation fell, and a lot of the Lewis voters have ultimately ended up voting Poilievre if they voted. So I think she'll do well. I think she's a very, very powerful resource and tool for the new leader to use in caucus, who's already in a safe seat. So I think she's going to have a big role going forward as much as she wants. And to Tim's point, whether or not she's second or third will really dictate how big a chair she gets on the first round of critics.
Stephanie, I'm curious to hear what you think about her campaign in general, but leadership races, there are always receipts, right, from the leadership race. We saw that with Stéphane Dion and Michael Ignatieff and how that all played out. I mean, if Roman Baber is a candidate next time, Leslyn Lewis obviously going to be a candidate next time, there are things that happened during this leadership race, things that they said that might not go over that well with the swing voter. So to me, I do wonder about the impact of the spotlight in that sense. But I don't know if you have a view on Leslyn Lewis's campaign and whether she comes out of this better than she did in 2020.
So a couple of things I'll say. In 2020, Leslyn managed to capture sort of the populist prairie vote that was anyone but Aaron, anyone but Peter. Mm-hmm. And there was a wing. It wasn't social conservative, if we're thinking about that in the context of words like the anti-abortion movement and things like that. She was the populist sort of candidate. She was new, she was fresh, she was exciting. And more importantly, she was not Aaron O'Toole and she was not Peter MacKay. That vote in this leadership race, such as it is a group of people, are all Poilievre now. That populist, prairie populism has moved to Poilievre. I also don't think that you have, as much as we talk about Leslyn being a grassroots candidate, she came out of nowhere. Yeah, but not really. Like, there's a lot of big establishment heavy hitters that are operating behind her, helping her out. And they definitely were in 2020. They're not that active this time around. Why? Either they've walked away or they've parked their support too behind Pierre Poilievre. So that's the first point. The second point is this. If there was anyone in this leadership race who was going to challenge Pierre Poilievre in a meaningful sort of accountability piece of a way, it could have been Leslyn Lewis. Mm-hmm. She could have been, and let's go back to the 2017 leadership race. Recall when Kelly Leitch suddenly wrapped herself in the Canadian flag and started talking about a values test and all of that stuff. And Jason Kenney stood up and said, I sat next to you in cabinet for the better part of 10 years and you never said word one about that stuff. So Kenney made a choice in that campaign to walk out and sort of try and tamp down that argument right away, like just shut it down. Think about it in the context then of Leslyn. Leslyn could have done the exact same thing to Pierre Poilievre, right? She could have stood up and said, I was sitting in caucus with you for 8 months, 9 months. You never said, I don't even know if he said anything. I want to say that clearly. But she never did that. She never attacked him. She never went after him on the authenticity piece. She tried 1 or 2 times, but she never did it hard. That's interesting to me. That means that she has a son. She is ambitious. She does want to play a role because she doesn't want grudges. She doesn't want those receipts being called in when it comes to who gets what cabinet post in the next Poilievre government. In terms of what she said during the leadership race, she's in one of the safest seats for the Conservatives in the country. I don't know if it's going to hurt her with her own constituency. Is it something that the Liberals sort of try and, move up to the national discourse? Well, as, we were just saying, the next election's 3 years away. How many clips they can hold on to from this leadership race and weaponize in 3 years, I don't know.
Leslyn Lewis did, in one of the debates, go after Poilievre a little bit, but it was in terms of his support for the Freedom Convoy not being strong enough and early enough, right? Which is a kind of very focused on the Conservative base and people who would be motivated by that issue. But the broader public does not think that Poilievre probably should have gotten more into the convoy early on, right? So that accountability was much more inwardly focused than you could say like outwardly focused in terms of some of the candidates trying to prepare them for a general, that kind of thing. But I don't know if anybody wants to weigh in before we move on to Charest and Poilievre, but all right, we'll do that. We'll go off to Charest then. So obviously for him, success would have been winning, and we think that that's unlikely to happen. So my question starts here. Chad, we can start with you. Assuming Charest loses, as we kind of assume, what's next for him, but also perhaps more importantly for the people who signed up to support him?
I don't know. Do you remember Jane Stewart, who's a cabinet minister in the Crestview government, Minister of Human Resources Development? Very, very accomplished minister, very tall. And if you remember Jane Stewart, I don't know if you remember Jane Stewart's dad, an Ontario provincial politician named Bob Nixon. And Bob Nixon had about the most interesting second act in Canadian politics. He was one of the very rare Ontario Liberal Party leaders who didn't become premier, but who then came back in a successive government after no longer being leader to be finance minister and to be a wildly powerful, influential finance minister in a successive Ontario provincial government. If Mr. Charest wants it, he has a bunch of political options ahead of him that are not obvious. He could be the single most serious, single most eminence member of a future Poilievre cabinet. And that doesn't seem obvious today, but it's obvious if you want to win seats and you want to populate a cabinet, build a cabinet with real lumber. And let's remember that just like Peter MacKay did last time in choosing to run again, he gave up a lot financially. He had to resign gigs that have income that won't all rematerialize on the other side of this, not having won. I hope that Mr. Charest will seriously consider whether or not his commitment to being in the Conservative Party extends to being in a Conservative cabinet, not just leading it, because I think he could be a wildly powerful Minister of Finance or Minister of Foreign Affairs that would be hugely useful to Team Poilievre. I'm also going to issue a broad mea culpa to Tim and to you and to listeners and readers and viewers. I said the best he was going to be able to do is come third, and I was dunking on that for a long time. I think he's probably going to come second. And that's going to be a pretty big accomplishment for him. Though I think his contribution to the race has been a little pious, a little new to the movement, a little high-handed, a little dated. He just hasn't been on the road for a while either. So do I think he could be better and could be a hugely powerful member of a future Poilievre team and run, even though it seems like he would never do that today? I think he absolutely should do it. He'd be wildly successful at it. But today he comes second, and maybe he goes back into getting 2/3 of his board gigs back. But I hope he isn't done in politics, because this is about to get more interesting.
Stephanie, I'm sure the press conference where Charest and Poilievre go up together to announce that Charest is joining Poilievre's team is one that you're going to be excited to be at, I think.
Look, I don't. If Pierre Poilievre holds press conferences, I'll be excited. But that's another thing. Listen, I think with Mr. Charest, Chad raises some good points. You got the sense with Mr. Charest at the outset of this race, the very early days, the whole is he going to run, is he not going to run, that this was almost like a bucket list thing for him, that he really wanted this. He was ambitious. He believed in it. He believed in what he could provide to the country, and he realized that this might in fact be his last chance to try. And he tried, and he gave it his all. And I know this hasn't been a race where we've done a lot of deep dive into policy ideas or discussed it, but what he has brought to the table is a suite of ideas that are about updating sort of how the Conservatives view and manage and think about government and the world for the problems of the modern era. And that's really very valuable. And to be able to have those conversations, is he a future finance minister? Is he a policy guy? I don't know. It's up to what he wants to do. Is it enough to say, at least I tried? Right? At least I tried, and now I'm going to go back to my board gigs, and I'm going to, hang out with my wife, and we're going to travel the world and eat expensive yogurt at the Westin for breakfast, like you did in a profile, maybe that's enough. One of the things that'll be interesting to see in terms of the vote count and the point allocation is his team has been consistent saying, we have the points, right? We can go on this point system. When Patrick Brown was kicked out, there was this narrative that the Brown campaign would sort of pick up its infrastructure, move over to support Charest, and that was always the inference, right? The two of them were working in tandem somehow. One was going to support the other. So what happened to that then, right? If that, was it ever real? One, were Patrick Brown's numbers, people consider them wildly inflated. Will this be proof that they were in fact wildly inflated? I don't, to go out and capture those votes. I don't know. So I think that will be interesting to see how Charest performs in some of the ridings, perhaps where Brown was believed to have a lot of strength and what he takes from that. And is it bigger than Quebec? That's the other thing. If Charest's base of support, if he outperforms Poilievre in Quebec ridings, and, we, the media, sometimes love a narrative, right? And it's, oh no, Pierre Poilievre has no support in Quebec. Oh no, Pierre can't win a majority government because he can't support Quebec. I don't know. There's lots of different ways to get support and build support in Quebec that aren't about Jean Charest. But some of it will be Jean Charest. Will he continue to speak out against Pierre Poilievre even? He does have respect in Quebec. Will he be quiet and go away if he chooses not to engage any longer at the Conservative federal level, or will he continue to fight Pierre Poilievre just on principle?
Tim, what do you think's next for Jean Charest?
Well, he can do whatever he wants. Let me state the obvious. Look, this whole question, and I'm not saying that Stephanie posed the question earlier, and I'm not calling Stephanie stupid by any means, because I value my life.
Go ahead.
No, I wouldn't do that. I'm not Pierre Poilievre. Not like in the media. But this whole notion, he must run or he can't run. Who gives a damn? Guy's 64 years of age. For any of the candidates, Robin Baber, whatever age he is, whether he runs for the Conservatives or not, that's entirely up to him. Just because you run the leadership, you don't have to run the party. You don't have to run for re-election. So that's up to him. That question gets asked because it gets on the issue of commitment, as we all know, and you're really committed to the cause. I don't think Jean Charest has to ever answer a question about his commitment to the country and public service. So that question in this case doesn't apply. Chad's theory is an interesting one. When Chad was speaking of that scenario, he reminded me of somebody we both used to work for, and that was Joe Clark. I don't see, because Clark came back afterwards, and though he hadn't left politics and hadn't had the commercial success of Mr. Charest and hadn't led a government, but he came back and became a great foreign affairs minister for Brian Mulroney and did some impressive things. I don't know if I see Mr. Charest doing that, but this is what I hope to see, Eric, is that if, as we all seemingly expect, Pierre wins on Saturday or early Sunday morning, his outreach to Mr. Charest and his words about Mr. Charest need to go to a place they haven't gone before. Because Mr. Charest also symbolizes a section of the party, we'll see how large it was when Saturday night comes, who aren't comfortable naturally with Pierre and some of the things that he said. And you can dismiss us, them as, old red Tories and old progressives, but you don't win by dismissing those people entirely or at all. So the challenge is less Jean Charest and arguably more Pierre Poilievre's. How will Pierre deal with Jean Charest and his supporters? To me, that's a fascinating thing. And I would say this in conclusion. Look, I don't think Mr. Charest, again, back to the do no harm analogy, he's done himself any harm. He didn't need to do this crap at 64 years of age. As Chad said, he was vacuuming up cash. He'd gotten past all the scandals in Quebec. He didn't have to spend 6 months on the road at that age doing what he did in his 20s with Chad and Chris Breen and others. So full credit to him, because I think finally he gave voice to a lot of people in the Conservative Party who legitimately wanted to discuss the issues Jean Charest was pushing Pierre Poilievre on, and finally who want to see a maturity in government, that everything isn't simply trinkets and baubles. And finally, I would say this, there's two finalies. wouldn't be a press conference with Charest. I see it being a YouTube video where Pierre can say, "Look, I finally found my own old timber," and he can photograph him next to that piece of timber. How's that?
Very good. Very good. Okay, we are getting
video ideas like that. Come on.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So time's running out. So let's. We have been weaving discussion of Pierre Poilievre throughout this thing. So there's not so much more we can add. But here's the question I have, and I'll just hear from each of you. Chad, we can start with you. Does it matter if Poilievre wins on the first ballot? Does it matter if he gets 60%, 53, 70? Does that matter?
Yeah, first ballot win always matters. For first year as leader. Scheer won a very, very tight race. Did it really impact him in the first year? No, he had a pretty unified party right away, but it certainly didn't help him survive, not winning his first time out. So I think the bigger your first ballot win, proving you've got a mandate from the party, just makes it easier because the new leader can then say, the party's taken care of. I now have to get on to the next job, which is winning over the country.
Stephanie, does it matter?
Yeah, it matters. And to pick up on a thread from Chad, although Pierre Poilievre had the lion's share of caucus support behind him, absolutely, there are MPs who don't support him, who are questioning their political futures under a Poilievre-led party. But if they look at those results and say, well, hey, now, my riding, my grassroots, my people are backing Pierre Poilievre, then I need to make a choice, right? Like a harder choice. Listen to the grassroots, believe that old conservative, we listen to the grassroots. We are a grassroots party. This is what the grassroots have chosen. I better get along with it, or I better go. And I think the decisive nature of that victory, if there's no room for wiggle, it'll help make those decisions and potentially pull the caucus together a little bit faster than it might otherwise.
Tim?
Well, if you look at the most recent history, the last two leaders have been taken down by premeditated homicide by their own caucus and members because they didn't have enough comprehensive support and because they didn't work to garner that support when they had impish, wimpish victories. So I think Pierre wants to send a message, as I said earlier, that he's got this ship under control. And the final point I'd make on that, he also doesn't want Stephanie and her colleagues and critics and others saying, well, look, you didn't really have that big comprehensive win. What about this faction? What about that faction? If he can tamper that down on day one, that's a win for him.
Okay, he's
going to owe nobody anything.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
The high level.
Right.
Wins decisively, he owes nobody anything.
Okay, we're going to finish off with this, and you can be as detailed or as vague as you want. Stephanie, Tim, and Chad will go in that order. Predictions for Saturday. Stephanie, are you willing to venture?
It's funny. I had a conversation with somebody yesterday, and it went like this: Pierre's going to win on Saturday, right? Well, yeah, he's going to win on Saturday. But what if he doesn't win on Saturday? Do you think maybe he's not going to win on Saturday? No, he's going to win on Saturday, and that's about as far as I'm going to go.
Tim?
I don't see how he doesn't win at this point. And again, for me, the interesting part will be second and third, governed by some of what we've talked about on this podcast. I do hope Mr. Charest gets second place. I think he deserves it. I think it will show he still has significant political skills that the Conservative Party could benefit from.
Chad?
I think Pierre wins it on the first ballot with a number that starts with a 6. And I think he probably gets to about 65. I think turnout is a number with a 5 in it, above 55. So I think you're between 55, and you won't get to 60% turnout. You'll get to 50, somewhere between 55 and 57. I think Pierre probably gets on the low end 63% on the first ballot, on the high end somewhere just above 65. I think Mr. Charest and Dr. Lewis end up fairly close. One of them's in the low 20s, one of them's in the high teens. And then single digits for Baber and Aitchison. And I think the leader will be named by 9 p.m.
Okay, because Tim said early Sunday morning, and we all have plans. I don't want to still be at the Shaw Center early Sunday morning.
I don't think it'll be 7 p.m. like the party's saying right now in media advisories, but I think by 9 we're going to have a leader announced.
For what it's worth, the party said yesterday they were saying like 7:45, 10 to 8.
All right, we'll see. That is probably the prediction that is the worst. that we're hearing today in terms of when we'll get the result. Anyway, thanks so much, Chad, Tim, and Stephanie. Really enjoyed chatting with you. Tim and Chad, of course, throughout this campaign. Stephanie, this is the second time you come on the pod. Really appreciate it. And we'll have some results hopefully on Saturday night. I have been in a number of leadership races where I had to cancel plans pretty late into the day because of unexpected things. So really appreciate you three coming on and giving us your last take, and we'll see how it all unfolds on Saturday.